Good evening, everyone. Before we start the presentation, I wanted to turn it over to Belinda here to do a land acknowledgement for the place we're at, and then we'll get going.
Itu Dekam, Mekjanawi, Hadachi, Takadi, Dati. We're on the land of the Shasta people here, and in the village of the plaza is called Kwakaka. So that's where the crow lies. So we always acknowledge the land base where our ancestors were, and here it was the Shasta Nation, the Shasta people. We still have Shasta people here. Thank you.
Okay. So we're just going to settle into, there's a PowerPoint, there's images, there's slides, there's maps, but trying to weave multiple stories together. And it's a story of the land. It's a story of people in place. It's a story of crisis, because we're all experiencing a crisis right now. Climate change, we're all kind of living through that together. And our grandchildren and children are experiencing that. And us as middle-aged and elders, we're all going through that. And those of us who live in southwestern Oregon and Northern California, we live in a frequent fire system. It was shaped by fire. It evolved with fire. It's a dry forest system, they call it. It was managed and tended very carefully for thousands and thousands of years by Indigenous people with fire. The use of fire as a land management agent, mainly by the women, right around Jackson Hot Springs in the Hudson Bay diary accounts. When settlers were coming through, they saw an Indian woman burning on those slopes carefully, applying fire to take care of the oak woodlands, to manage the insects and the pests, to reinvigorate the understory plants. So this land was carefully tended. It was not a wilderness. It was intensely managed by tribal people for time immemorial. And then there's this shift and change. So now we're here in 2022. We're living in the era of mega fires. Really intense smoke season. We call it fire season, but a lot of the young folks call it smoke season. I'm really glad we have blue skies today, right now. Last year we were experiencing a lot of smoke. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the impacts, the solutions, and a collaborative framework model on how to get this work done in partnership. So in addition, we're going to talk about restoring what we call Aboriginal fire. Nice to see you. We sat in teepee together. Yep. So Aboriginal fire adapted ecosystems through an ecological approach. This is our partners down in the mid-Klamath Karuk tribe that we work with really closely, and they're applying fire. That fire over there is in the Yosemite Valley, intentionally lit to cleanse the land, to reduce fire hazards, and to improve wildlife habitat and fresh browse. And then those logs are around 60 years old up in the Willamette Valley that are the product of the lack of fire. So we'll talk about that as well. And this is actually the Ajumawi Atsage homelands, the Omawi Band in Hat Creek, California, where we do a lot of our work as well, a place called Hat Creek.
So you can't go in and put Aboriginal or anthropogenic fire on the land the way the forest is right now. So a lot of the work that Lomakatsi does, Marko will probably hit on it later, is setting the stage to bring good fire back. So if you put fire out there right now, we'd have a major disaster. But everything we do is thinning, getting the logs out of there so that we can put good fire back so fire can do the job that it's supposed to do.
Right. So we'll talk about what ecosystem restoration is, and then ecocultural restoration, and what we call ITEC, Indigenous Tribal Ecological Knowledge. Belinda will talk about that. Forest restoration, why, purpose and needs, and then some examples. We're going to show some examples right here in Ashland, a nationally recognized model in our watershed, projects in the Klamath, projects in the upper basin of the Klamath. So some examples of how this comes together. And then different restoration implementation strategies. So thinking back, there's a Forest Service nursery in Central Point, Oregon. It's called J. Herbert Stone. Has anyone ever heard of that nursery? Yeah. So they do a lot of great plant grow out right now, native plants, special native plants for habitat restoration plantings. But back in the day, we had some pretty intensive forest management happening, industrial forestry. And it's still happening on private industrial lands. But on federal ground, formerly Aboriginal tribal lands, still Aboriginal tribal lands, there was intensive clear cutting. It was a highly mechanized liquidation of our forest. And in order to address that, these large trees, these old growth trees were being harvested and removed. Mm-hmm. And then trees were being planted in monoculture rows. That's why we have fires that are really intense right now, because of these even age plantations. So Herbert Stone Nursery, just really close to here, they grew between 15 and 25 million seedlings a year. So you can only imagine the amount of intensive clear cutting that was happening and changing the landscape. That's actually a photo of me 30 years ago. I was a crew manager, a tree planter. This is on a project in Illinois Valley near Cave Junction. It was actually an area that got protested pretty heavily. There were blockades. There was the Earth First movement. People were trying to stop the old growth logging. There were even wildlife biologists and Forest Service personnel walking out and joining the demonstrators because of the amount of impact on that landscape. And the fish biologists at that time were saying, if you log this watershed, we're going to lose salmon in this creek for a long time, coho and chinook. So this is what was happening. It was changing the stage of the landscape. And that's actually a photo of me with the tool. And then if you look all the way to those 3 trees, there's one of our foremen. So there's 30 people across the slope. And there was massive clear cutting, intensive. If you went to Safeway here in Ashland back in the late 80s, there were like 20 tree planting vehicles going out to plant the clear cuts. So it built a really intense industry of logging and then replanting. And people think about tree planting, that's a good thing, but we were removing a diverse forest, different sizes, different ages, and essentially planting even-age trees that now has shown to carry fire more intensely across the landscape.
Setting the stage for catastrophic wildfire.
Right. So
all the work you did 30 years ago was setting the stage for the wildfire.
Yep. It's called industrial forestry. We learned a lot. So Lomakatsi, we're a nonprofit organization. We're based here in Ashland. We work throughout Oregon and Northern California. We also we have an office on Washington Street right here in town. We've been around for 27 years. We employ currently right now about 80 employees in our organization and employ a lot of other folks that we hire. We also have an office in El Torres, California, where we came from today, a satellite office. So our mission is to restore ecosystems and the sustainability of communities, cultures, and economies. So here we are putting logs in the creek to benefit fish, Acknowledgements fish that go from the ocean back up into our tributaries. We're putting fire on the ground where we have a tribal workforce all the way on the right there, planting along the Williamson River. And then we're doing ecological thinning of those plantations to make them more structurally diverse, to make them not so homogeneous. So from forest to fish, from the top of the watershed all the way to the valley bottoms, that's a lot of our focus. It is our focus, land and water. And this is some of our team members. These are our technicians up in the Klamath, Upper Klamath watershed near the town of Beatty, Oregon, a little east of here, about 2 hours. And I really encourage people to go east. The west side is beautiful, but if you go east, it's amazing. The east side has a lot less people, has a lot more wildlife. The west side's very biologically diverse, the Klamath Siskiyou range where we are. You start going east, you're gonna see a lot of really neat rock formations, and that's the homelands of the Klamath tribes, which we do a lot of our work with. And this is some of our crew members. Actually, Belinda's brother is the 4th person in. Wasika Brown, he's one of the leads for the tribe. And then this is some of our team members at Table Rocks. You might recognize Table Rocks. We have 4 different federally recognized tribes represented in this photo. Our Latino workforce, our Euro-American workforce, and really all coming together to take care of the land as a team. And so there's a whole social ecology element to our restoration work and building that capacity. And then this is off work, out of our work clothing. We're building a culture of restoration, trying to turn back the biological clock. This is just a Christmas party a few years ago. So just sharing a little bit about the family element, the many generations. We actually have 3 generations on our crew. A grandpa, a son, and his son, and now he has a son. So building intergenerational capacity to do this work. So we work with tribes, schools, industry, communities, municipalities, other nonprofits, federal and state agencies. We operate 10 programs, as was shared, both education and restoration. So that's a little bit about us. And restoration, so ecological restoration is trying to set the stage back of renewing a degraded, damaged, or destroyed landscape through active human intervention. There was the whole conservation movement of put a line around it and protect it, like the national parks were being liquidated at the turn of the century. But there was also this people in place interaction with the land that also made it healthy and vigorous. And Belinda will talk about that. It's both an art and a science. So we work across the whole different variety of ecosystems, from oak woodlands to prairies to mixed evergreen forests, sage steppe systems on the east side. So these are all fire adapted systems. Some of the photos there, that one all the way on the right, we're actually bringing in big logs with helicopters to get structure in the creek so salmon have a place to spawn. So when you look at that picture, you see somebody standing on logs, but the element of that is 25 miles of stream system that's being restored. Vietnam veteran pilots that were hired, very skilled at precision of laying those logs down into the creek. So a whole employment, tribal workforce doing the assessment work for the cultural foods. So a lot goes into this work, and that photo is a snapshot of some of the things we do. Oh, and this is right here at the Billings Ranch coming into town some years ago. So ecocultural restoration is a different element of ecosystem restoration. And that brings in the human part of it, and I'll turn that over to you.
For time immemorial, Aboriginal people, we don't consider ourselves Indigenous, really, because we are Aboriginal. We are place-based to our heartland. Everybody's Indigenous. Everybody in this room is Indigenous to some place on this globe. And you were a place-based people. So you came from a singing and a dancing and a drumming society. And your ancestors, I don't care how far back you turn the clock or the curtain, you're going to find yourself there as a place-based people. So I really encourage you. The words that I shared with you when we started this was Mikjanui Hadachi Takati Dati. That means we're all the children of the heart of Mother Earth. So you're Indigenous. We're Aboriginal to this land. We are the only people on this land base that can claim land back. So the damage that we're trying to correct is the damage that's been done by mankind. So colonization, when colonization happened, European colonization is when we started getting impacted by all of these indicators, and they removed the people. We're the keystone species that kept the land healthy and well. It was our home, it was our grocery store, our pharmacy, our church, everything. So it was very well cared for. It wasn't a wilderness. So that's the other myth that we debunk, is the John Muir myth, is that this was all a wilderness before people got here, because people were here. So what we're doing in ecological restoration is trying to turn that biological clock back to some semblance of health, of what the land should be and how the mother should be treated. So many tribes are coming together in tribal partnerships and working together intergovernmentally. And one of the things that I'd like to share from some of the past slides is that this work that we're doing isn't just healing the land, it's healing the people. So again, I want to debunk another myth out there that all the Indians got along and everything was hunky-dory before European colonization. Well, that wasn't true either. There were some very severe, brutal things that were happening. And so these jobs and putting tribes back together in areas where we're working together with the youth, where we're working together governmentally, where we're leveraging money, where we're sharing resources is helping to heal our people too, across 3-4 different tribes now. I think we have 23 tribal members working for us.
And then in addition to working with the tribes, and there's 9 tribes in Oregon, and 110.
110 I hear now in California, and that's just going to start growing.
And those are federally recognized tribes, and non-federally recognized tribes are a whole bunch of other tribes. But these are sovereign nations, so they work in government to government, and Belinda will talk about that later. But when you're investing in restoring the land, and you're thinking about long term, so when you work with agencies, and we have a lot of great agency partners we work with all these federal, state, and other nonprofits. A lot of those personnel and staff in the agencies, they come and go, but tribes are still there. They're place-based. So doing restoration, building a restoration culture and economy, investing in tribal engagement is the best for long-term conservation outcome. So these are the places we work. We work in the Willamette Valley and the Umpqua. Our biggest initiatives are in the Rogue, Klamath, and the Pitt River watershed. So the Rogue Basin, over 4 million acres, and we'll talk about that later. We work through the Intertribal Ecosystem Restoration Partnership, through a tribal partnerships program, and operate a whole variety of other programs. We talk about the triple bottom line is health, community well-being, socioeconomic, ecological health, and the economy, building that economy, that place-based conservation economy. So we got a pretty broad range of places we touch. In any given day, there could be 15 different crews working across 2 different states. And we don't do it all alone. We do it through a lot of partnerships, tribes, federal, state agencies, other nonprofits. And those are only a few examples. So what are the problems we're facing? All of us sitting here together as a human family. We have climate change, we have temperatures rising, we feel it. We have drought, fire probability and effects. We see high intensity fire, mega fires like we've never seen, million-acre fires. We have altered landscapes, so we have this elevated risk of more fire. Our old-growth forests that used to be able to withstand fire, when fire would burn at low intensity, are diminished. Our forests are really dense, smaller trees. We have a lot of threatened and endangered species. And the services that the ecosystems provide all of us, especially here in Ashland, we get drinking water right out of this amazing watershed that's got old-growth habitat, Rita Reservoir. We get clean air, we get jobs, we get biological diversity and carbon. So we have the problems and we have the services that we're trying to abate those threats. So this is kind of sciencey and high level, but I'll just try to summarize it. How can we abate those threats is we can manage these fires. There's places we need to put these fires out. We saw the Almeida fire. We have many loved ones and staff that lost homes. So there's places we just got to pound on fire. We got to bring the resources in and we got to protect human communities. But where we can allow fire to burn, and we could put a line around it and let it do its ecological work. We want to manage fire, but we want to protect communities. We want to put fire on the ground in a good way, and we want to improve the ability to capture fire when it starts initially. We want to protect and promote these old forests because they're a life source. We want to protect those areas. We want to do good ecological work to accelerate their growth. And this is what we're going to talk about is proactive ecological thinning. How do we do that on the ground? So this is a map put together by the USDA Forest Service and our partners at the Nature Conservancy. It's called the Quantitative Risk Assessment. It was put together in 2018. But if you look at Medford in Southern Oregon, the red demonstrates ecological departure. And the truth, like a lot of people are moving because of climate change and the fires. It's super oppressive. We all know it. And we have crews on the ground during fire season, all for 110 days a year, long fire seasons like we've never seen. But that red demonstrates risk to homes and communities. So the assessment looks at the forests that have departed, and they're prone to more intense fire, and it also looks at risk to communities. So everything east of the Cascades, you can see, you know, going up through a bend and all the way up into Washington. East side forests tend to burn too, but right here where we're at is a dry forest. It's not a temperate rainforest. People think of that. When you start to go north on the west side of the Cascades, then you have more moist forests, but even those forests are starting to burn really intensely right now. So this is just a snapshot. And then fire sheds. So we all know what a watershed is, right? A geographic area that defines where water flows and comes to an end point. Well, here we have fire sheds, and 5 fire sheds in each state is assessed as the highest risk from the Forest Service. If you look at Oregon, 4 of those are in Southern Oregon. So I'm not going to lie when I say I don't know about living here, but I don't want to promote that because we love this place. And then the people from here, they want to care for this place. So that's just a snapshot. This is 2009. Remember the Siskiyou Fire? Who was here during that time period? And we really dodged the bullet. We dodged the bullet with the Almeida Fire, but we dodged the bullet with the Siskiyou Fire that just missed going into the watershed. This was a September day, an anomaly, wind event, and we had 200-foot flame lamps just near Tolman Creek Road. Someone said they were close to that area. Up at the top of the ridge on Tolman, we did some forest restoration thinning, and those homes are spared. So the treatments can work. So in addition, we have these what we call present conditions. These are kind of sciencey, forest ecology type terms, but we have densification, what we call stress-related mortality. So we're all here in this room together. You're going to hang out right there for 200 years together, this close together. That's what's going on with these trees. They're really tight. It creates competition for nutrients, sunlight, water, and then susceptibility to insects like pests like the pine bark beetle, the Douglas fir borer, like you could see here, all the red. And then when those red trees and the mortality happens, you start having litter on the ground. You have simplified forests that have been heavily logged. The most fire-resistant part of the forest is the big trees. That's what we want to protect. So you remove the big trees that can handle fire, and then you have trees that were planted, like I talked about earlier, or you have densification just from natural regeneration. So now you have a situation prone for fire. And then in the shrub species, like you see here with the I got a pointer here? Oh wow, look at that. So this bitterbrush, when it gets old and decadent, it's not palatable, nutritious browse for the wildlife. So some of the elders that, from our tribal partners will say the deer stomachs are kind of hollow and empty. They're not getting the nutritious browse because fire hasn't burned through at low intensity to reinvigorate that browse. So you can see the antelope on the other side. So we have all these conditions, these impacts. We have decadent vegetation. And as one of our elders mentioned, if the tribal people came back here from 200 years ago, they would look at this place and say, it's a wilderness, an unkept place, not cared for, not tended, not heartfully managed. So here's Ashland, looking out from Siskiyou Mountain Park. Has anyone ever gone up to Siskiyou Mountain Park? Right up Park Street. It's a beautiful, I think it's 280 acres, managed by the city of Ashland. We do a lot of work up there, and then it goes into the Ashland watershed. So looking at the north side of town, kind of toward Jackson Hot Springs, you could see this condition. It's just dense forest all through the watershed. And this is what we have when you get actually on the ground, you start going down the steep slopes, you have impenetrable thickets. And we want to leave some of that because it's important for wildlife, but we have a lot of it. And then we have these large old trees that have small trees all around them, sucking up nutrients. And we also call those ladder fuels. So when a fire comes on the ground, those are the ladders that carry the fire into the crowns of the trees. And then when it's a crown fire or a treetop fire, and the wind starts blowing, it just starts carrying fire in a really intense way. And then we have these large, old hardwoods. This is a black oak, gathered acorns for subsistence, first foods. We're losing that cultural memory of the people that care for this place and the families that lived off the resources of that tree. We have these dense cedar and Douglas fir growing around those trees because they're not being burned by the native women. They're not being regularly and repeatedly stewarded. So why do we do forest restoration? You know, we've suppressed fire really well. We became this militaristic machine that put every fire out. Smokey the Bear was one of the most incredible propaganda efforts. Only you could prevent wildfires. Well, really what they were looking to do is they didn't want fires to burn the big trees, because those big trees were revenue for timber. And yeah, Smokey did care about not burning down campgrounds. And we just want to take Smokey and put a drip torch in his hand and a little bit of loppers to do some good work. So we suppressed all these fires for 100 years. And we outlawed indigenous fire and took the best stewards off the land. So we're not putting fires on the ground, that maintained it. And we're talking about flame lands like this, when tribal people were burning. And we'll talk about that more later. So now we have these mega fires. Last year there was over 7 million acres burned in the United States, just in the US. We had a 1 million acre fire in California. When I first moved here in the late 80s, I mean, we were looking at really small fires in Happy Camp, you know, 880 acres, maybe a 70,000 acre fire. I mean, really relatively small. And we're spending a ton of money, our taxpayers' dollars, on fighting fires. It's an open checkbook. There's no, it's just a huge industrial industry. It's a huge industry, the firefighting industry. And it's important, we need it. We're firefighters too. But it's how and when. And then we have a lot of insects and disease, we talked about that, and we have these logging roads all over that have been poorly planned that really impact salmon and sprawl through the landscape. We have climate change. It's just knocking on our door, it's here. So I won't get into this, that's a little... So without fire suppression, without people pounding on fires and allowing fire to burn, this is year 0. In year 20, this is the flame lanes you're gonna see. That one in the center, I mean, you're still looking at a 10 to 15 foot, you know, small fire episode, and then down on the bottom, it's low intensity, what we call cool fire. It just burns up the fuel, the needles, the needle cast, the small twigs. And then year 40, without fire exclusion, this is kind of the condition you have, you know, structurally diverse, different ages, different sizes, wildlife like that. And some openings, wildlife love openings. And then the meadow complex are really important for first foods. Year 60, we still have some of the same behavior happening. Year 80, it's looking pretty good. And then with fire exclusion, 80 years after not allowing fire to burn, that's just 80 years, you start to have this condition. So really dense, prone to fire. So how do we address the strategy? We start to look on the big picture with our team of scientists, agency partners, economists, and the Southern Oregon Forest Restoration Collaborative, SOFRC. I actually serve on the board of directors, so one of our partners. They developed a strategy. How do we grapple with this situation? It's enormous. Across the Rogue Basin, we have over 4 million acres we have to address that are fire prone. So we've identified that there's 1.1 million acres that are departed where we live, that are susceptible to high severity fire. And we haven't seen much yet. We had a 1 million acre fire in California. This isn't the Dr. Doom, live in fear, it's the reality. It's looking at us right in the face. And then we have these fire prone areas, all the red you see. So partners have come together. They developed the Rogue Basin strategy. It's not a blueprint, it's not a complete blueprint, but it's a pathway forward to strategically think about how we address this forest health crisis and how we put resources and we prioritize, because across that 1.1 million acres, you're looking at $2,000 to $3,000 per acre to treat this stuff. It's expensive. You're looking at billions of dollars. So millions and millions and millions. So we are tactically and carefully assessing where we're going to put those investments. Right now we have bipartisan infrastructure funds coming. We have different agreements that we can get this work done. So there was a period of complete polarization, the timber wars, where it was the loggers versus the environmentalists, right? That was kind of the paradigm. Now we've found that radical middle where we need the loggers. We need their skills. We need their ability to strategically think about how to remove trees, because there's so many of them. And our environmental partners are saying, stop. We can't go overboard. So there's this radical center, And that's the place we operate in, where we can do good ecological work, we can support local industry, and we can bring different sides together. And we've accomplished that. Not everybody's happy, but we've found that what we call zones of agreement. So there's a whole human dynamic to developing that, and this strategy helps us with a pathway forward. So the strategy addresses the how and the why and the how. So we have climate resilience. We want to protect threatened and endangered species, like the northern spotted owl. We want to have resilient landscapes. We want to protect our communities from houses burning up, like we've seen. And then we orchestrate these treatments. We want to know where we're going on the ground, what's the land allocation, and what's the predictable workflow. So as we start to invest in this, it's a whole opportunity for timber mills to downsize and use small diameter to create new products from the wood we harvest as the ecological byproducts of restoration. And then we want to create jobs. So it's the social, economic, and ecological, that triple bottom line we talk about. So one example that has really demonstrated that is right here in our watershed. We've been able to be a partner in this, Lomakatsi, the Forest Service, City of Ashland, and the Nature Conservancy. We have an amazing watershed right above town. It's right over there somewhere. There it is. And that's even a part of it too, even though it's Hamilton Creek watershed. So it took years to get to this place of trust, because there were people locking their necks against on bulldozers. Mm-hmm. Understandably, we were liquidating the forest, right? So, do we have fire in this watershed? Yeah, we have a history of it. Recent history, we had the 1959 fire, Jackson Hot Springs. If you look up on those slopes, it burned at high severity, and you have really dense forests that have regenerated, mainly shrubs and madrone and oak. So that fire burned almost 5,000 acres. 2009, the Siskiyou Fire, we had the Oak Knoll Fire that gave us an indicator of what was coming. Some homes burned down. This is Chris Chambers, our division chief of forestry, actually was on that fire, and he's one of our key partners. He got to experience some home loss, but then Almeida Fire really was a major eye-opener, a wind-driven event right through a riparian area. So yeah, we got fire. And how do we address this situation? We come together as a partnership. We co-invest. So we have two nonprofits, the city and Forest Service, with support of the community to get this work done through what we call a Stewardship Agreement. It's a legal authority through the USDA. We actually were a part of helping to develop that authority back in the late 90s. Trips to Washington, D.C., advising our elected officials to use this mechanism that engages the community, has meaningful engagement. The community is not kept in the dark. They get to give input, and we get to get the work done. So we utilize these agreements, and these are small diameter logs from a tree plantation. We want to protect the soils. This is decomposed granitic soils, really highly erosive and sensitive. So we chose to use helicopters through the decision that was made by Community Alternative through the National Environmental Policy Act, and we were able to start work. Most of it, commercial logs were removed by helicopter. Then we were able to do some ecological thinning, like you could see here, the small diameter thinning, and then hire local timber operators, and then get fire on the ground, as Belinda talked about. So the design of this is it's got a science-based approach, a social approach, and an art. So we have a municipal watershed. This is Reeder Reservoir. Has anyone ever been up to Reeder, where our water source comes from? Well, when you turn on your tap in Ashland, if you're living in town, that's where our water's coming from, off the slopes of Mount Ashland and Wagner Butte, and all the snowpack and the springs. We have old growth forests that we want to restore. We want to create more open conditions. We have spotted owls we care about, a big population up there, and then we want to protect the community. So that's how the project was designed holistically. So annually, we have a water value here of 8.5 million. A lot of gallons coming down into homes, and a lot of visitors to our community. And we have the ski areas. This is what we would call ecosystem services. And if you look at those slopes, the decomposed granitic soils, and we have Reeder Reservoir there, if that were to burn at high severity, we're going to be getting our water from Medford. We're going to have sedimentation in Reeder Reservoir. The drinking water is going to be severely impacted. Plus, we're going to lose habitat for the northern spotted owl. The area up in the watershed is called an LSR. It's a late successional reserve, meaning it was designated under President Clinton in 1994 through the Northwest Forest Plan to protect threatened endangered species like the northern spotted owl. So the owl came forward, the personality of the owl, warning, you're going too far. It showed itself, and like other species have. So that's why we're able to do this great project in threatened, endangered, sensitive ground, ecological, and get some good results. So we took that project that was 7,600 acres, we expanded it to 52,000 acre area. We called it the Ashland Forest All Lands Restoration. We went on to private lands. To date, we've implemented about 13,000 acres, so we've treated about 25% of that landscape. And what the science shows is if you can treat a quarter of that landscape, you're gonna reduce the spread of fire tactically on ridges and in key locations. So a lot of this is thinking about where to apply our treatments on ridges, what key areas, what habitats do we want to protect. So a lot of partners, we started gaining more partners. Build it and they will come. We had the Chief of the Forest Service visit us. Washington, D.C. has been here many times. This has been an example that is nationally recognized and influenced other projects. We got funding. We continued to build financial resources. The nonprofits raise money. So this is a business relationship to get this work done. It's not a profit venture. We all want to be made whole, but we're not in it for the money. We're in it to take care of the land. And boots on the ground. Andrew, you might remember Braulio, our relative. So there's Braulio doing some thinning around large old trees. We're protecting the big trees by thinning the trees around them that have grown in the absence of indigenous fire and ability for lightning fire to burn. So this is an underburn we put on the ground. There's some what we call surface and ladder understory thinning. And this is some fire during the winter. And then we're protecting the large old trees by removing the duff and the needles, so when we do burn, we don't impact those trees, because since fire has been removed, their feeder roots come up to the surface, and if we apply fire, we might impact those big trees. And then we're thinning the small trees. And then we generate some what we call ecological restoration byproducts. So if this was run by a timber company as a timber operation, it's a completely different model. Their job is to generate revenue. So, but we needed to hire this community that really knows what they're doing. So our job was to restore the forest and then generate revenue that then gets reinvested back into the project. We generated $6 million, it went right back into the project. If this was a timber sale, it would go to the US Treasury.
So could you explain that Master Stewardship Agreement? It's through the Master Stewardship Agreement mechanism that money goes back into the project where it's generating income.
Exactly. Yep. So through that agreement, we looked at that earlier. So
not every agreement is like that. So
right.
It's really, really important. How many Master Stewardship Agreements do we have right now?
7.
7. So that's an agreement mechanism that we work under frequently in Northern California and in Oregon.
Right. Thank you for that context. So fire for water, we're thinking about protecting our water supply. We need to put good fire on the ground. So after you've thinned the forest, this is good fire. You're looking at it. You're seeing creeping fire. It's a celebratory moment, and you'll have some flaring. And we have a lot of fuel on the ground, over 100 plus years of the forest not having fire. And we've expanded this model. So if you look here to the, oh, I'm doing it wrong. If you look here to the Ashland project, now we have the West Bear All Lands. We're implementing a 27,000 acre project, all on private lands, Talent, all the way to Medford. And then these are our other tactical locations that we want to take care of. So we're thinking about species, old trees, community resilience, and ecosystem resilience. And we formed the Rogue Forest Partners. It's got a lot of nonprofits and federal and state agencies doing this work. But this is the condition of the woods. For those of you who don't venture deep into off-road areas that don't have trails, you're looking at anywhere from 800 to 3,000 small trees per acre. It's a lot of biomass. It's never been like this. And then you have, what we call widowmakers, the tree that's hung up. So not only is it ecologically impactful, it's also dangerous for the workers. Mm-hmm. So what's happened to the workers who've done this work? Mostly Latino workers. They've been exploited. There's been theft, wage theft. It's an underclass industry, so we're elevating that workforce. Health benefits, good paying jobs, advancement opportunities, lay foresters, because they have to go in and they have to dissect this 100+ years of lack of fire.
They're the PhDs with the chainsaws.
And this is some of our crew that are protecting your community around Ashland. One of our many crews. That's Ryan Puckett. And these are the hands that touch the land, the boots on the ground, day in and day out. Okay, I'll step over here. You can take this one. So this is a quote from our chairwoman right here, Belinda.
So we've been commissioned to take care of the land, our waters, speak for those beings that don't have a voice. And I know some of you probably knew Grandma Aggie, and we're familiar with her. She said the longest distance is from your head to your heart, of that traveling that road of how do we connect back to the land, how do we connect back to these holy places, and how do we connect back to people actually having a hand in taking care of the land and taking care of each other and taking care of the fish and the animals, because those are the beings that have no voices. So Grandma Aggie always used to say, speak for those beings, speak for the fish. Who else is going to speak for the fish? You know, who else is going to speak for the northern spotted owl? Who else is going to speak for those generations coming? Because in the way that our people think, we're supposed to plan and take care of those 7 generations coming. So unfortunately, in this colonized world that we live in, we're not thinking 7 generations for the wealth and the prosperity of those generations coming. And that's a huge problem. And like Marko was saying, this is just going to continue to escalate until somehow, some way, or unless Mother Nature just really purges the whole lot of us and starts over again. I mean, we're in a crisis. Go ahead.
So to address the crisis, we have some great partners. This is the Cultural Fire Management Council down just a few hours south of us. This is a tribal burn team trying to get good fire back on the ground on the Yurok Reservation. This is one of our employees, actually, I think Belinda's great niece.
Yes. And
some of our relatives and friends of the Klamath tribes speaking for their water. But during the day, these folks are putting hands on the land. During the weekend, they're in ceremony. And then during the weekend, they're also fighting for their water and their lives. So we're really blessed to have this leadership within our organization. And then, so we operate the Tribal Partnerships Program, and I'll turn that back to you.
So again, addressing impacts to aquatic, terrestrial habitats and ecocultural systems, and I can talk about all of this, but I really want to communicate to that depth of how you can accept this in your heart, is that we as people need to be included in how this land is managed. And again, it doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what color earth suit that you're wearing. We're all in this together. And so our response as a people is imperative to the situation that we're in. And again, having those awkward conversations, however many awkward conversations that we need to have about how we're wasting water, how we're building more houses up the WUI. I mean, however those conversations need to happen, those conversations need to happen. And maybe this group is the group that can help have those conversations. So carrying on, we're still here. A lot of times people take it as a front that we're still here. They think that all the Indians were moved to Siletz and Grand Ronde, and the Takelma were here, and so there's this misconception and misunderstanding of who was actually here, of who we need to go to as an elder. We went to Chief Privat, the chief of the Shasta Nation, when we did the response to the Almeida Fire and the Ashland Ponds, and he signed a letter for us. So we had the Shasta Nation chief, who was also a Vietnam veteran, who grew up in the Illinois Valley, who was treated very, very poorly by the folks in the Rogue Valley at that time, back in the 60s. And so we're trying to integrate that culture back into what we're doing. There's no reason that somebody like that man can't be honored in this community for the work, for his service, for all of that he's done. So we're still here, and now we're carrying on to those next generations, and it all begins with a prayer. So again, you know, when I think about this metaphysical thing, you know, and I feel like our people kind of had that down, the connection with their heart and their spirit and what they did. And now we're kind of looking for it again, you know, trying to find the walls on that. It's just right here. You know, I'd encourage you, again, find your culture, find your heart, find your being that connects with this kind of work or not connect with this kind of work, but just have that knowledge that you're a part of this. And again, our elders, our tribal leaders protecting Medicine Lake, we're still in battle with the federal government. They're still coming for our food and our water. I'm in battle in California, the state of California, for our water. State Water Quality Control Board, many, many years. 2014, we had cultural beneficial use designated for our water in the state of California. So there was no water designation for fish and wildlife, and there was no water designation for subsistence in the state of California. So that's what we got designated, and now we have to exercise that designation, and we're getting pushback, 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 pushback. So we're digging in. And then the geothermal is actually a mineral. And they've been coming for our Medicine Lake for a long, long time, which is a holy place. And so we've been 20 years in litigation protecting Medicine Lake highlands.
So just to clarify, that's not Lomakatsi, but that's the Piute River tribe along with other tribes. And there's a nuance too when we have a lot of tribal employees, but ultimately their loyalty is to their tribal homelands and their federally recognized place in that ground. So there's a lot of cultural agility training we do internally for non-tribal staff, tribal staff. We have a Latino workforce. We all have to work together. We have to learn about each other. It's actually really beautiful at the end of the day. We're making headway.
Mm-hmm. So, did you want to do the boarding school?
Yeah.
So this was the removal of the Native American children back in the 30s, 50s. My grandfather was one of them. He was taken at 5 years old and put in the Fort Bidwell Indian boarding school. And this mass removal of children and the boarding schools is what really disrupted the land care too. So the people getting taken off the land, and then those oral traditions and oral histories that are handed down, the traditional ecological knowledge, the languages, the songs. This land knows its language. This land knows its songs. And this land knows its people, because those people have been here for time immemorial. And so when you think that you're trying to control something sometimes, you don't ever know what's going to happen, what that outcome could be. Because right now there's a revival, there's a revitalization of culture, and there's a huge recognition of what needs to happen of reconciliation. Not everybody knows quite what to do about that, but there's a recognition that it needs to happen.
If I could share, Belinda, so how does this relate to the previous slides? Of fire is when the people were removed from tending the land and putting fire on the ground, it disrupted the health of the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So this is a point in time when by the 20s, you can go to prison for using fire as a Native person. Mm-hmm. A lot of people were put in jail. They were intensely abused. So when we bring crews back on the ground, we thin that ecosystem. We get it to a pre-colonial state, and the tribal people can come and put fire back. And even our non-tribal workers, it's a celebratory moment to get fire back on the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. It's healing. It's a unification.
Mm-hmm. How do you manage that? How do you manage so that it doesn't get out of control, especially in the summertime when we have 115, 110 degree weather, and we have a tremendous amount of wind that comes in at 50, 60 miles an hour? There's no way to control that fire.
We're not putting fire on the ground in those conditions. Yeah, I mean, there's definite times of year, again, that ecocultural knowledge,
right.
That knowledge that the grandmas had.
Right, they did it in the springtime or they did it in the winter.
And I grew up doing that.
Right.
So in the spring,
Fall.
in the fall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in the spring and in the fall is when my grandfather and I went out there and put fire on the ground.
Yep.
So there's a time, there's a
Right.
right time to go do that.
Right.
And that's really, really important, because if you went out, like I said earlier, and tried to put fire on the ground right now, it wouldn't work. You'd
It's
have
a
another
disaster.
catastrophe. Yep, right. You'd have another catastrophic wildfire. So today, the demographics are 6.7 million Americans identify themselves as American Indian, 574, and it's more than that now, of federally recognized tribes in the United States and growing. And then a third of the native population live on Indian lands and villages. And again, I'm going to say that even though that we have this sense of trying to be inclusive, even with the Rogue Forest partners, it's just really, really hard for them to recognize the Aboriginal people here. It's really, really hard for them to see the Aboriginal people here. And so again, I would encourage anyone in this group to really have a voice, you know, to be able to speak to that, to be able to include them as we get more connected to our heart and our land and why we do the things that we do. So the tribal sovereign governments. So we're the first best stewards of the land. And sovereignty. Sovereignty is what we have when I talk about indigenous. We're sovereign nations. So in the state of Oregon, there's 9 sovereign governments. So there's like 9 nations within a nation. In the whole United States, there's 574 more now of federally recognized tribes. So those are 574 sovereign nations. So we're like China within the United States. Do we exercise that? Have we exercised that fully? Absolutely not. Has Congress wanted us to exercise that fully? Absolutely not. Has anybody supported us exercising that fully? Absolutely not. So on a scale from 1 to 10, we're down like maybe 1.5 of truly exercising that kind of sovereignty in the United States, doing what we can do to help restore our land and help restore our people.
But they've broken all the treaties.
So
All the treaties.
government to government is what the tribes have as a relationship with the federal government that's congressionally designated that no other people have. That again sets us apart from just a partner, just a collaborative partner, just some voice out there. It puts you in that government to government relationship. The tribes could call and shut down the West Bear Project. If 3 tribes called and wanted the West Bear Project shut down, it would probably be shut down. They support it. They want it done. But those are the type of things that the tribes could do if they so wanted to, and if they stepped up to the plate and they said, hey, wait, you're not protecting a plant here that we want protected. You're not protecting our salmon, and you're not taking care of our cultural artifacts here. You know, done. We're finished. You know, and there's so many projects happening, so many places that they just don't have the capacity to be there for everyone. We're very, very careful to hire cultural monitors, to get cultural monitors trained on our staff, and they're the ones that go out and see on the ground what type of artifacts are still there. Like through the Almeida fire, there's artifacts laying out there, you know, in an area that everybody said, oh no, but nothing's here anymore, you know, nothing, everything's gone. And so we always have to show up and go, hey, wait a minute, you know, we saw something. And so that's that little voice still crying in the wilderness of, hello, you know, we need to pay attention here. And so we're having more of those wake-up calls. So the community, tribally led organizations, leaders. So tribal governments are sometimes just as corrupt as other governments. It becomes about power. It becomes about position, status, and maybe less about the people. So we try to really work in those tribal communities, meet the people, go talk to the elders, work intergenerationally within that community, make sure that we get the opinion leaders who not just are tribal government, but sometimes are little elders that scold us and you know, set us straight. And we have to be willing to take that too. I don't know how many times I've gotten scolded by elders, and it's like, yes, you know, I'll correct that because we're there on their land. You know, we're there on their land, and how much they suffered through in their life to get where they're at, and they're still showing up. So you have the traditional leadership, the elders, clans, bands. In our tribe, there's 11 autonomous bands. It's the only tribe like it in the nation. Tribal membership, tribal community, the government, of course, and then the economic development. So in a really well-oiled machine, and we work with tribes that have really well-oiled machines there, things flow really well. When you get into the government and the politics, sometimes, you know, politics change, people change, it can get a little bit challenging. But for the most part, we're doing well. And a lot of that is the job creation. Being able to build jobs in those large landscape initiatives like Marko was talking about. The first step is building a large landscape initiative and then being able to layer in the workforce, the training, endangered species, you know, the Partners for Fish and Wildlife programs, all of those things into that large landscape footprint. But without that large landscape footprint, you're not going to be able to build any of this in. So we don't have to stay here.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just a picture of our band ancestral areas and some of our village and sites.
What I think is interesting about this map, and we're working across this is in Northern California. We talked about Ashland, so sharing another example is pre-colonial. Look at all the village sites. In some places, pre-contact populations more than we have now.
And that was here,
yeah,
in this valley.
From Ashland to Grants Pass. They say there were more native people here than there are people here now, all in the watersheds. And then this is the condition we talked about, the cultural landscape of oak woodlands that a lot of the tribal people subsisted on, the acorns for carbohydrate, for food, for meal, for flour. That used to be an oak woodland. When you take fire out of the system, you lose the food source. So what we talk about is reference systems, pre-colonial systems. What did it look like? So the photo on the right is when it was managed with tribal fire. The photo on the left is just upslope. That's what happens when you remove fire. You have Douglas fir encroaching. And Douglas fir has its place. It's a beautiful tree. It has a strong place on the landscape. But in relation to the oak woodlands, that reference system is what we think about. You're up still.
Oh, okay.
Then we have, we incorporate into our restoration strategy ITEC, or Indigenous Tribal Ecological Knowledge, and that's shared by all of us across the planet. Place-based knowledge, relationship to a place that is acquired by Indigenous and local people. Even the local farmers who've been here a couple hundred years, they got some sense of what goes on in their watershed. Mm-hmm. That's direct contact, direct interaction with that environment. So that ITEC is a big part of restoration. That comes back as that reference, pre-colonial reference. What did the land look like, and how do the people care for that piece of ground, and what practices did they use? What time of year did they apply fire for what species of plant? 80% of the material culture were plant-based, for baskets, for material culture, and then the foods. So they were farming this landscape with fire. It was a sophisticated agroforestry application before it was called agroforestry or permaculture.
So, and the elders will tell you that for the plants, and when we're replanting, doing riparian, it's for the cultural plants, for the medicinal plants, and for the edible plants. And so if you're around Aboriginal people, just know that you're probably going to hear that, because they're interested in fire to do the basket weaving. Our people are renowned over the world for their basket weaving, especially California. And of course, the edible, the elderberries and all of that they gathered, the rose, you know, some of them have ceremonial purposes too. And so you will find that in our culture. And so the Indigenous, and we just got scolded. This is another thing that we just got scolded
Getting
from.
scolded.
So we just changed this ourselves rather than TEK. And Frank Lake, I don't know if any of you have heard of Frank Lake, but he's a scientist out there who's done a lot of work in this too. Also changed it through the Forest Service is Indigenous Traditional Ecological Knowledge. And because the elders say that it's not just traditional ecological knowledge, it's the full spectrum of the Indigenous way of thinking. So they wanted to make sure that it was a little bit more than just TEK. The scientists, I think, gave us the TEK seat at the table like probably about 20 years ago. They came up with traditional ecological knowledge, and so that was a little seat at the table we had that we could sit down and go, okay, we're here. We have TEK. And so now we're taking a little bit farther than that. So it's that intimate, detailed knowledge of plants, animals. And I have sons that live like this. They know where to hunt, they know where to fish, they know where to gather, they know where the foods are, because they were raised on the land like that. And we know with our youth crews and our youth groups that that is really a healthier way to be. We just finished a youth crew up in the Ashland watershed last week, and they will tell you year after year after year, that was the 10th year, that that's where they feel most healthy, that's where they feel most at peace, that's where they come together not knowing everybody, and they're a team by the end of 4 weeks, and they go away with changed lives. So this work is really, really important for that, and helping connect youth to the land again, because youth have this thing they call now, some of them nature deficit disorder. I don't know if you've heard about nature deficit disorder. It would be unheard of in my family, but it's a thing. And so we try to work to challenge and overcome that. And getting youth back on. I have a nephew right now who just finished goshawk survey, 4 weeks, 5 weeks of goshawk survey. Mm-hmm. Got him out from behind this, got him out from the sports games, and he is like hearing the bird sounds. He is completely engaged, and just finished that season. Now he's going to go on to common stand exams. So this can change lives.
Elmer Stewart.
What's that?
Elmer Stewart.
Oh, okay. And Elmer Stewart, he was a champion of ours way back in the day, 1963, and he was the one that said fire ecology was a baby science. And so he was trying to get us to recognize Aboriginal fire and anthropogenic fire, fire as a land management tool. And his argument then was, we're not listening to the people who have done this for time immemorial. Instead, we're listening to fire ecology, which at that time I think was maybe a 5-year-old science. So again, you know, when you think about that metaphysical, you know, part of connection, you know, how does the mind and the heart and the land and everything come together and meet? So Omer knew it. It took a long time. Kat Anderson now has revitalized his work. So what is that book that she has called?
Tending the Wild.
Tending the Wild. So Tending the Wild.
Write that down. It's a good one if you ever want to check it out.
Tending the Wild is out there, and then also, I want to say
Forgotten Fires.
Forgotten Fires. I was going to say Flutes of Fire. Forgotten Fires is the Elmer Stewart.
So really what
book.
we're talking about is marrying Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge and Western science together. Mm-hmm. That's what we're doing in Lomakatsi with Restoration.
And I would like to say too that the ceremonial part of it and the prayer behind it is really, really important. Marko's been at this for 27 years. Lomakatsi is a Hopi word that means life is good, life is in balance. And so for 27 years, it's been bringing a life that's really out of balance and an ecosystem that's really out of balance, like to that radical middle that he's talking about. And so that's constant, bringing that thought, you know, those prayers, those ceremonies, and even for our people praying for their land, for their people, for work, for jobs, for healing for their land and for their communities. These prayers are being answered. And so it still starts with that for us. It starts with that thought, it starts with that prayer, and then as days get hard, that's what keeps you going.
I'm going to do this one.
So this is the Indian Fire, this is Yosemite Valley, and this is another place where You see a lot of densification, and this is where John Muir actually had impact of the wilderness, of wanting to save Yosemite, of this untouched wilderness, and then of the elders. This is where the story of the elders, the Awa'ani, and I would encourage you to read that article too. I can send it to somebody here. It's a really, really good one. Came back and said that the land doesn't look anything like it did, and it looks like it's uncared for. And then some of these areas were burned out villages. So, you know, as we see in California, some of those areas that were burned out villages are becoming burned out villages again. You know, so we're seeing that pattern kind of continue, which isn't a good pattern either. So you see how it was open and clear, and now it's, in the next slide, it's densified, and it is not healthy. So people did have a big role in the land and land management. I don't know how we stuck ourselves in apartments and concrete, but that's what we did to ourselves. Want to go?
So this is in Australia. So some of the studies on how Indigenous fire has increased biological diversity.
And this is actually work by Doug Bird, Dr. Doug Bird. Him and his wife have done a lot of work with the Martu, and they've worked also out in our band, or my other band area, northern Piute Rock, and using farming as a tool. So as the Aborigines worked with fire over there, using fire stick farming is what they called it, fire stick farming. And his work continues on. He worked with the Karuk extensively, and helps us sometimes with our Fire Climate Summit presentations.
So this is Marcia Small. She used to be in the Native American Academic Studies program here at SOU, and promoting that Indigenous sciences, they can be complementary. And that's a lot of what we're working to bring together. And then this is a lengthy definition. And Dennis Martinez, the chair of the Indigenous Peoples Restoration Network, who did a lot of work with Lomakatsi early on, mentoring our team in how to use fire in the early 2000s. I don't like to read slides, but I'm going to read it. And you got to fit a lot of information that covers the past, the present, and the future. So the process of recovering, as much as is recoverable of the key historic pre-contact ecosystem structure. What did it look like prior to the removal of the people and the change of the landscape, right? This composition, the process, the function, these traditionally time-tested, ecologically appropriate and sustainable indigenous cultural practices that help shape these landscapes, ecosystems, Belinda's been talking about. And then what we're simultaneously building in resilience, that's what we're doing right now, to future climate. We're predicting the future to maintain that ecological integrity in a way that ensures the survival of both indigenous ecosystems and cultures. So it's a good one. So then we use ecological forestry to do that work, an ecosystem approach. We use stewardship authority, and these are the demonstration sites across the United States that we're engaged in through the Restoring America's Forest program through the Nature Conservancy. We have 2 right here that Lomakatsi is engaged in. You go to the southeast, we were just over on the Cherokee Reservation recently. The southeast longleaf pine system, it's frequent fire system as well. So these are the demo sites. Then you look at them in America, and then you start looking globally. So we're part of a global movement, really, and we can only take care of our piece of ground. So bringing this model from Ashland Forest Resiliency, we got a phone call in 2007, 2006 from the Klamath tribes right over the hills. Anyone ever been to Chiloquin, Oregon? I know you have. But hour and a half away, there's a whole tribal community, not too far from us. They had a large reservation. They were terminated in 1954, termination policy. So that reservation then became the Fremont Wainema National Forest. one of the last national forests to be designated in the early 60s. So
last.
here's the Forest Service. So, and the tribe has a government-to-government relationship. They wanted some partner capacity. We came together to manage this piece of ground. Has anyone heard of the 242 fire that happened last year? It was a huge fire over the hill. A lot of the smoke we were breathing was coming from there. So we took that model and we came together as a partnership. They requested our support as the fiscal lead to help manage some of the resources. They have a government-to-government relationship. And then the Nature Conservancy provides the science delivery. So this is K Falls, if anyone knows where that is. I drove through there today. It was hot. And that red is the former reservation, or what is known now as the Klamath Reservation Forest. And similar, you have this kind of red zone, high severity. That fire ripped, and it almost burned the community of Chiloquin down. We're going to be doing a great project there this fall with about 15 tribal members doing restoration. So we have this insect mortality issue. The tribe really cares about their mule deer. Healthy mule deer means frequent fire. So think about just right here, if you're looking outside, if this was your pharmacy, your grocery store, your church, you were farming this ground with fire, but you were doing it in patchy mosaics. And you had it inventoried in your mind, where to burn, when to burn, for what resources. So this is how we're trying to set the stage there. This is 1932, not too long after fire suppression policies in the 20s. So you have some of the largest ponderosa pine in the world is over the hill. It's still there, large old growth ponderosa pine. These photos taken in the 50s. And then through our project, we're having to work with 4 ranger districts in that former reservation boundary, because to the tribe, it's still their homelands. It's not Forest Service, it's not Klamath Falls, it's not Chiloquin. Well, it is Chiloquin, because that's chief, right? So we have these 4 agreements we've implemented. This is the past. We look at these ecological anchors. Where do we start our work? On the stand level. Big old trees, big nurse logs, things that we want to protect. We go in, we use a method called ICO, individuals, clumps, and openings. We take a tree plantation that's even aged, and we want to break up that homogeneous structure. So we do that through a skips and gaps approach. We want to leave some areas really dense for wildlife. Other areas we want to open up. We want to recreate meadows. So that's the methodology we were using there. We're protecting large old trees, 350-year-old ponderosa pines, cutting small Douglas fir that were the product of fire exclusion, and then engaging that program intergenerationally, as Belinda talked about, with youth, with elders, with workforce. This continues to this day. This individual, Orville Rondo, Justice Black's son, today, he's managing a whole workforce up near Prospect, actually with Belinda's son, George. Continuing that restorative effort, and then working with a bunch of team members to get this work done, from equipment operators, labor crews, even training people on how to count beans. There's a lot to this work. There's a lot you can do. Technical personnel. And then what the Forest Service used to do, we're now doing in partnership. We're laying out the units, we're doing the science analysis, we're marking the trees, and the tribal community really cares about these big old trees. They care about what's going to leave and what's going to stay. And then adjacent to that is a place called the Siskiyou Marsh, 30,000 acres. Our partners, the Nature Conservancy, manage that. That's on the former reservation. And some of the work we're doing is to benefit the white-headed woodpecker. That's culturally really significant for the people, but also really likes open forest with small snags with not a lot of density around it. We're using that ICO method on that piece of ground. So then fire did come. We did this work in 2012 all the way to around 2019. This is a place called Piute Rock. It's about 2 hours from here. It's a private piece of ground. It's a cultural area. Northern Piute people take care of that ground. Even though it's on the Klamath Reservation, it's a Piute cultural site. And the bootleg fire burned through there, really intense. And this is before the fire, and that's after the fire. And you can see this is before the fire, because I helped steward this piece of ground for many years. And this is looking up into the Black Hills. And this is after the fire, completely what we call stand replacing high severity fire. Everything's gone. It's completely burned. So this is visiting the site, and it was pretty emotional for the tribal people to go there and see this, and this is a place not cared for. And so there's a good part of this story, though. The area we were able to care for, and this made national news, we were able to ecologically thin this old-growth ponderosa pine forest, and then you see these brown trees. That's actually not just from the fire, but we put a prescribed burn in there, the Forest Service did. So we thinned it, we put fire in, and then when the fire came, this is an island of old-growth habitat left. And everything around it that wasn't treated, the small trees, looks like this. So this gave a little bit of proof to the work that this does work. Even though it's charred and burned, it still worked. So looking at the past, looking at this simplified forest after it's heavily logged through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and then looking at our restoration work right here. This is what it looks like when we're done. And this is how we're doing it. Then you have this condition. And this is after the fire. Siketcha means thank you in the Klamath language. So the fire came and it stayed on the ground. It still burned in a lot of intensity. And then we conducted training all through this. So building capacity, and then taking the logs and restoring stream habitat. So we're not just thinking about forests, we're thinking about aquatic habitat. Another example down in Hat Creek, I'm trying to be cognizant of our time here. This is another model, working with the Pitt River Tribe, an organization, California Trout. So how do you change agencies that are linear? You got California Fish and Game as an example, and there's some great people in that agency. They do great things. Their planting strategy is very monoculture. They want it on a grid. The tribal community wanted cultural plants. They wanted plants for fiber, for baskets, for fish. So we had to change that policy through the work.
It's another time we were getting scolded.
Yeah, so how we did it is we designed some, with Cal Trout, that organization, and this was for red band trout. So we put some large wood in the stream with helicopters, and then we created these planting guilds that were very detailed. So put in about 6,000 plants along this creek. So we're talking a lot about tree cutting. We do a lot of planting too. And then we were able to map out some prescribed burn areas for the oak woodlands, and then conduct a workforce training. So you start to see the pattern. It's the same model that gets laid down everywhere we go. But the first thing is who's leading it. So some of us aren't from Hat Creek. This is the tribal community. What do you want? Tell us what to do. How do we bring our capacity and listen to you and develop the project according to your ITEC, Indigenous Tribal Ecological Knowledge. So this is us think tanking. How do we get this work done? So that evolved into this really amazing cultural revitalization that I'm going to stop and have my colleague, who's Pitt River tribal member, talk about.
So this is really, are we good on time?
Yeah.
Are we up for time?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So this was really important for our people because it'd been 150 years, about the same length of time that fire has been removed from the ground since we built a canoe. And this was the Ashland Youth Crew and our Pitt River Tribal Youth Crew coming together. So again, you have that multicultural melding and ability to talk with each other, to communicate with each other in a setting that is really friendly and cultural, and amazing waterfalls. If you've never been to Bernie Falls, I highly encourage you to go there. So it's a beautiful, beautiful place.
Not that far.
It's not that far.
Good to leave the Rogue Valley sometimes. Just go down the hill.
It is.
The hot springs are amazing.
Oh, they are.
Amazing.
Yep.
So here we have our elder, Radley Davis, and then with the Hat Creek, that is absolutely one of our, probably the best fly fishing spots in the nation. And then what the youth enjoyed was the fish traps, so the ancient fish traps. We weren't cow herders, we were fish herders. So you see that lake is called Big Lake. That's by Fall River Mills. And see the lake out there, and then the rock. I'm going to walk over here. The rocks. Okay,
I'll point.
Yeah, there you go. From coming in, like from out coming in.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go. So right there where you see them coming in, and you see the rocks coming to get just the first one.
That one?
No, that. that one.
Right
that
there.
one there.
Yep.
So then
Okay.
you see the little
Oh,
pond.
it's a pool, yeah.
Yeah, the little pool that's made, and then it comes in narrower, and then the pool that's made. And so when you get the fish all trapped in that first pool, then you put rocks all the way across, and they've caught a whole bunch of fish. And so that's the old ancient rock traps for fish, and the youth really enjoyed that. They also enjoyed fly fishing because the outfitters took them fly fishing on Hat Creek after they completed their work on the trail. So we have a language elder, Laura Seal, who helped teach the language and came out and presented to the youth. And so it gave the elders a chance to interact with the youth and be able to share their language. Because if you remember that boarding school picture, that's when our elders couldn't speak their language anymore. That's all the language my grandfather knew at 5 years old. And so when they were sent to that boarding school, they were disallowed to speak it. It took him till he was 80 to teach us, because he never wanted to have happen to us what happened to him with speaking his language. So it's really, really important that we have that language revitalization, because the elders will also tell you without your language and without your land, you don't have a culture.
So the other part of this is these youth were getting paid. So it was a paid workforce program. We were actually operating five youth programs that summer, 2 tribal, multicultural ones here on the Rogue. So, and some of these youth that were 14 and 15 are now in their early 20s doing some great projects like today. We were out in Modoc. So it's building that land-based restoration culture and economy.
Again, the canoe, they finished that canoe, and that was just amazing. And so for the Ashland youth, it was also amazing to be able to go down there and interact with our tribal youth, and they were all friends. There wasn't any division on the ground. So regionally, we work in that capacity. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then Ashland Watershed, we brought the tribal youth programs, the local youth, and we had the chief of the Forest Service visit us at the time. He's somewhere in there. There he is. We had Mayor Stromberg and Forest Service leadership. So nationally recognized model. And then this training occurs in tribal council chambers.
Yep.
So also how to make decisions. This elder's definitely running the show. And how to operate in tribal government. Some of our other tribal leaders were very hands-on, volunteering. They didn't even want to get paid. They really wanted to see their youth empowered to do this work. I'll skip that one. So then taking this model over to Yamoose, they call it Fort Bidwell. The Fort Bidwell Northern Piute community, we actually left from there this morning, and different times, but we were able to bring a program together in partnership with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, 12 tribal members. So you're starting to see is workforce seeding everywhere to do this land care work across the region. And we're not the only ones, but we're pretty cool, I think. So this might look intense. Juniper, western juniper. So you think about the Douglas fir I was talking about, and it's encroaching. Well, the sage steppe habitat with the lack of fire has, that juniper right there is like 40 years old. They suck up a lot of water, the springs are going dry, and without tribal fire and fire frequently burning, you have juniper encroaching, really changing the whole species composition, impacts on wildlife. We still love juniper, we want to keep some juniper. So there's also the tribal community with their homes. So this is Nevada here, and this side is northeastern California. Oregon's only miles away. So here's the partnerships, Bureau of Indian Affairs, NRCS. This is us bringing people together in a room like this, coming with zones of agreement. We start out, it might be 4 or 5 years before we get a project on the ground. We've got to build trust. It might be a Saturday at an elder's table, breathing in cigarette smoke, right? So this is the Warner Mountains. Anyone ever been to Surprise Valley? Surprise Valley Hot Springs? It's not that far away. Check it out sometime. So this is on this side of the hill, almost in Nevada. And if you look at landscape scale, this is the 3,500 acre reservation. And this is all Forest Service, and this is BLM. So what Lomakatsi is doing is all lands. Nature knows no, fire knows no boundaries, water knows no boundaries, wildlife. So we're working with our tribal partners here. We're working on large agreements with the Forest Service. We actually have a 20,000 acre project we're implementing. The last month we've had a whole tribal crew doing goshawk surveys to protect goshawk. And then we're going to get ready to do implementation. This is a long-term commitment. So bringing all these lands together to get a restoration initiative happening that are going to benefit wildlife, protect the community, create jobs, and in this case, protect cultural resources. So this is before the work, and this is after. It's still a lot of juniper in there, but you can see we've opened up some meadow complexes. So this is 2016. You go back there now, you're seeing lots of antelope, lots of elk, lots of ungulates starting to come back to their homeland that's been encroached upon. And I'll turn this one over to you, going back on the west side of those slopes.
So then this is a whole nother people culture on the west side of the Warner Mountains. So this is the Warner Mountain Range. And so this is Coastal Elected Band area on the XL Reservation, 10,000 acres of reservation. We didn't become a formal tribe until 1996. There's 11 bands of us. Our band has 8,000 acres of the reservation. And as you can see, you have a lot of juniper densification. We've got to do something with the juniper down there. We're doing little projects all over as we speak, but there needs to be a lot more done.
Even though this looks like an evergreen forest, it used to be more like open sage steppe habitat with an occasional juniper. So these trees suck up 30 gallons of water a day. So you have springs going dry, and I mean, they're beautiful trees. And the elders want to keep the big old ones. We don't cut old growth juniper.
They have legacy trees.
They have legacy, and then they harvest berries. So this is working with the tribal community. Where do you cut? What do you leave? And putting that on the ground.
And then with the Fort Bidwell community too, they're still using the firewood from the juniper that we thinned out of that area. So our people also really appreciate that when we're doing any of the cutting or thinning. Our elders really appreciate getting some firewood out of that because we have elders that can't go out and get their own wood. So very cognizant of that. The Pitt River is actually called Ajum. We're the people of the river. Ajumawi is people. We're the people of the river. We're not the Pitt River people. We're not the Pitt River tribe. We were called that because we dug pits for the animals when they came down to drink, and we were just a nuisance to the cavalry. And so they ended up calling us Pitt River because their people and their animals would fall into our pits. And that's how we got that name. So we're Ajum. We're Ajumawi is.
And then Belinda, if I can respectfully share that this is where you used to put fire on the ground with your grandpa, and you'd burn annually with your dad and your grandfather. So tribal fire, agricultural burning, and restoring the sage steppe habitat that we've been talking about. So when you remove the juniper, you start to get those bunch grasses back. You get this system back that's been removed. Pardon me for standing in front of you. And the antelope start to repopulate the area. But we want to leave some. So this is, we have a mosaic, and that's what we talk about, maintaining that mosaic. So it is an ecocultural landscape. Belinda mentioned Ajum. And this is our 20,000 acre project we just started a year ago. It's in partnership with the Forest Service. We have an office in that community. It's tribally led, and a lot of those tribal members come to Ashland and work. And that's the thing I wanted to share too. For the last 12 years, the whole tribal community from the region stays here in town. Best Western, Days Inn. I mean, you know, we're supporting the local economy. Tribal councils are funding the lodging. We're employing tribal members, building capacity. They go through training here in Ashland, then they go back to their homelands with those skills and they apply it to that ecosystem. And then they bring those skills back. So it's a peer-to-peer learning. It's not, I'm the instructor and you're the student. We're peer-to-peer. And that's what's really beautiful about this. So this is the first project. Can you say it properly?
Takiwa.
That we start, the tribal language is coming back into Forest Service projects. Belinda's been a big lead on that. An area called Pine Springs. And then this is the complexity of the partnership, another model. So this is more on the human agreement side, we have this master stewardship agreement that Lomakatsi has for the whole state of California, signed by Randy Moore at the time. He's now the chief of the Forest Service. Very proud to say his signature's on there, mine's on there. And then we have a memorandum of understanding with the band, the Co-Selecta band. The Cultural Resource Committee and the Forest Service have their MOU in development. There's these different agreements. So all these agreements with funding and arrangements and how we're going to operate, how we're going to do business. This is the 2 to 3 years before we put anything on the ground. So there's trust. We know who's getting paid. We know where how the money's moving. It's not hidden. It's very transparent. It's all out in front. Different than the way our government officials have done business in the past, and they'll admit that. And now in the Forest Service, there's a lot of tribal leadership in the agency, which is really awesome. We actually have a former Hooper tribal chairman, Merv George, that is the forest supervisor of the Rogue River Siskiyou, and a strong ally, and has worked in Region 5, California, and then over here now. So you'd say people are infiltrating the agency.
Well, it says California Indians coming up to Oregon.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go over this piece quick because it's close to home. Oak woodlands, very important. And I'm going to flip through these. So it's the same kind of model you're hearing. You see this model. Now we're replicating it with other agencies. We have Fish and Wildlife as a big partner. Klamath Bird Observatory, anyone ever heard of them? So oak woodlands, really important. We want to protect these systems. We want to improve watershed health. They're declining. There's 4% left in the Willamette Valley of original oak habitats, about 33% here. So we developed a large-scale initiative through the Klamath Siskiyou Oak Network. We brought partners together. We identified these biological hotspots. Table Rocks is one of them. Coastal Valley, Upper Klamath Lake, and down in California, we managed this initiative the last 6 years with private landowners. Here's the range of white oak, the range of California black oak. They're declining. We care about them. This is up Indian Memorial. You can see this oak woodland system is so important for foods, for wildlife, for the people that we hear, the people that are still here. And once again, we're losing the large old legacy oaks due to encroachment and lack of fire. So these oak woodlands, you can see in the fall, that used to be 300-400-year-old trees, produce a lot of acorns, of now being overtopped like this, they start to fall apart. Their foliage goes away, their food goes away, their benefit for wildlife goes away, the benefit for people go away. So this is some of the context. There's 41 threatened endangered species because of that loss, 13 species that are not T&E, and just a lot of stats on the impact of these woodlands. This is a regional oak business plan we were part of, goes from California all the way to British Columbia. So we formed all these oak working groups up and down the I-5 corridor to abate the threat to oaks. And we were just awarded $7 million to do oak work over the next 5 years. Sounds like a lot of money, but when it comes to acres, it's not, but it's a good start. So I'm going to just flip through these quick. Acorn was kind of the staff of life for the people here. Cynthia Parker put together a really great book on processing acorns.
Food sovereignty is
food sovereignty. And
food
then
sovereignty is sovereignty.
And then applying fire to keep those oak systems, keep the insects, the weevils, knock back the invading Douglas fir and the species that would encroach. So these are orchards. They favored oak woodlands over mixed conifer forest. Douglas fir was actually called the devil tree because it impeded on that food source. And they were family and tribally stewarded, and the women were putting fire on the ground. They used it to shape trees. It was a really detailed horticultural practice. I mentioned this earlier. So this is one of our burn projects in California in 2006. What Agnes Pilgrim, Grandma Aggie, called cool burning. The fire just burns at low intensity. It consumes the vegetation, and it makes the oak systems healthier. And then the gathering of acorns. They wanted to keep the ground open and clear. And this is Frank Lake, Dr. Frank Lake, Karuk descendant, PhD, and he's showing the wormy acorns without fire. So if you were depending on them, you need to put fire on the ground. You're going to get worms. So 300 to 500 pounds of acorn per tree. There were acorn granaries. There were acorn processing areas. It was a huge part of the culture. Storage sheds, grinding areas, and all over the east side, even though it's not acorns, you find these women's tools everywhere. Communal mortars and pestles. We even see that locally, not that long ago. Something very local was located by one of our team members, so there was a big acorn culture here. You could see just the amount of granaries and all the use of the oak tree. Tons of elements of the tree, like using the whole part of the animal, right? Oak for firewood, basket weaving from the epicormic and advantageous shoots that came from burning. And then the digging, you were recently out digging yampa, so Indian carrot, right? And then planting the bulbs back, long-term land care. And I'm learning a lot of this from my colleague here. She took me out digging, what was that, 2 months ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the
And
beginning
then-
of June.
Yep. So, and then giving back, spreading seed around. So now we are here today. Densification, table rocks, loss of oak habitat, very important cultural area. 50,000 visitors a year. We've been on this project for almost 9 years now. Implementing restoration work, got a whole wide array of diversity of vegetation types. We have the science behind where do we invest from our partners. So we're taking the Western science, and then there's this whole planning module that we utilize. And sorry for I feel like we're in college here, but how these treatments work.
Because Dr. Metlin's helping us out.
Is it within functional range? Is it overly dense? So we assess and we make a decision on where we're going to put the work. And then when it comes to the ground level, we don't cut everything. We leave these retention areas, and the green represents retention areas for wildlife. And then we're going to thin and everything else open. And the red, I believe, is a lighter treatment because of certain species. We got mountain mahoganies in there, so it's very site specific. And this is what it looks like, uncared for, no fire. The crews come in, they start their thinning work. We start to make some small burns. We open it up, we free up these oaks. This is kind of a before and an after. We've restored that open condition. And then we're protecting these large old trees that are going to go away. These are massive oaks. And so we're thinning, we're doing weed control, we're getting slash treatment in, then we're able to celebrate when we can get fire back. And then we're thinking about the understory, herbaceous plants, reseeding, because those have gone away. Those native plants have been eliminated. So here's a before and an after. This is Siskiyou Valley. Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And then more of the same, thinning, helicopter use. This is a former oak woodland near Eugene, Oregon. We worked in partnership with the city. And then in the Colstein. And this is all the properties we've engaged in, we've treated, we've put fire on the ground. And I'm almost done. Wow, look at that. I moved through that quick. That was it. Let's see if I can go back. Oh, yeah, I really skipped over some things. So it just goes on, and meadows, and restoration, and restorative work. And then, in order to get the funding, I'm gonna share with you that, this is Silet's tribal members, we have to go to DC sometimes. So we put on suits, we go in front of Congress. This is the Undersecretary of Agriculture visiting our office here in Ashland, Jim Hubbard at the time, our co-selected tribal leadership, Josiah Jacobs, and Undersecretary Northey coming to Ashland, visit our crew, look at our work. These are people under the Secretary of Ag. So this is how the funding comes down: legislation, appropriations, trying to support this good work, promote it. They want to see the people on the ground. Senator Golden, 3 years ago, we were up there in Salem. The Oregon Conservation Corps program and the SB 762 funding for wildfire mitigation that Senator Golden and Representative Pam Marsh have lobbied for, and that's making it to the ground. Lots of jobs, lots of good work, lots of youth development, fish and wildlife leadership in DC, to testifying in front of Congress. Deb Haaland at the time is now our Department of Interior Secretary, was a Congresswoman. That's Congresswoman Haaland there. And we got to hit the pavement. We got to go to Washington. We got to show them what's happening on the ground. They got to see it. They got to meet the people. And this is in the USDA office, Tribal Leadership for the Forest Service. This is the National Congress of American Indians. So all these visits bring the funding, bring the knowledge, and then it makes it to the ground. Okay, we're getting there. So some acknowledgements of the partners that work with us. And thank you to Jordan Pease for his kind heart, giving us an opportunity to present, and thank you both very much. And questions, sorry, took a while to get here.